All right, so we'll start out, our first topic deals under books. So what we will start with is you spelling your name and telling us the title you'd like for us to use.
My name is Donalyn Miller, DonalynMiller. My title is Ambassador for Independent Reading Outreach for Scholastic Book Fairs.
Excellent. So, Donalyn, in your book, The Book Whisperer, you wrote about your epiphany. Please tell us a bit about your classroom experiences and how it shaped how you teach reading and language arts.
The first summer that I was teaching, the summer that I was preparing to be a teacher, I spent almost the whole summer designing all these units around specific novels that I wanted my students to read. Lots of fun activities, enrichment things, tea parties, all these things. And we were reading a book titled The View from Saturday by E.L. Konigsberg, which won a Newbery Award. And I had all my students reading that book, and I also had this giant packet of things for them to do. And I remember one day during our packet time, I didn't call it that, but that's what it was, one of my students came up to me and said, "Mrs. Miller, I've finished all my worksheets. Can I read my book now?" And this wave came over me that I realized that I was giving this child reading related things to do when what she really wanted to do was read her own book. And that I was creating the type of classroom that I disliked as a child, where I had a reading life at school and a reading life at home, and those never crossed paths. And I thought, I don't want to be the kind of English teacher that creates a classroom where kids hate reading. So how could I focus on that aspect of student choice, giving kids lots of opportunities to read their books while also meeting my academic responsibilities to them? And so that's the journey that I share in the Book Whisperer, how I went from that place of everyone reading the same book at the same time and doing the same worksheets towards a more free, open reading community where all readers were celebrated, all reading was valuable, and we could also meet our academic goals.
How many books do children need to read to be successful, and why? And then the second part would be, does the child's age make a difference?
I don't know that I want to quantify the number of books that children need to read to be successful with a number. I think what we have to look at is, are they continuously reading something? Do they always have a book going? We know that children, particularly in middle school, high school age, kids that read 30 or so books a year, 30 to 40 books a year, score in the top percentile on standardized tests of reading. That's looking at a calendar year, not just what they're reading at school. With younger children, of course, the books are shorter. There's a lot of value with younger children in rereading books multiple times, so it would almost be more reading events than it would be individual books that we would want them reading. I think for families, the best advice we can give them is, does your child always have something going that they're reading? Magazines, books, comics, graphic novels, news? Do they always have some sort of text that they're carrying around that they're committed to reading and that they're engaged with?
Referred a lot to the summer slide. What is the summer slide?
Well, the summer slump or the summer slide is a phenomenon that was first documented by Dr. Jimmy Kim out of Harvard. And it looks at how we see children scoring lower on standardized tests of reading in the fall than those same children scored the previous spring. And it's because they're not reading over the summer. And their skills decline, they erode. You know, reading is a skill just like anything else, and we have to continue practicing it to continue to grow our skills.
So how many books should children read during the summer to help avoid the summer slide?
Well, the good news that Dr. Kim discovered from his research is that children in the primary grades, so children kindergarten, first grade, second grade, need to read about 12 to 15 books over the summer just to prevent summer slide from happening. The children are smaller, the books are shorter, often those books can be read in a single sitting. If they read more than that recommended number, then they can even see some reading gain. For older children, the books are longer, the texts are more complex. A book might take several days to finish. We see the sweet spot to be about 4 or 5 books just to offset summer slide. And of course, they can make reading gains if they read more than that.
Okay. What types of books are most effective to spark children's passion for reading?
Well, I think the best book for a child is the book they will read and a book they can read. I see some reading snobbery going on out in the world. We complain that kids aren't reading, then we complain about what they choose to read. Of course, as adults, we want to challenge kids to read texts that are intellectually stimulating and challenging for them. But there's also a lot of value in what we would call less than highbrow reading, reading graphic novels and comics, reading serial fiction, series fiction. We see a lot of value in series reading for kids. So I think that we want kids to have a broad reading diet. We want them to have those more intellectually challenging books, but we also want them to have those fun books. I don't think those are separate goals.
What are the rights of the reader?
Well, the rights of the reader comes from Daniel Pennack, and he's really looking at how we're empowering readers to take ownership over their own reading and being realistic about what reading habits really look like. So we have the right to not read. We have the right to skip pages sometimes. We have the right to skim. We have the right to reread a book. He has several rights of the reader that he's documented. But what he's really trying to do is empower readers to read like readers really do. Adult readers sometimes skim. We sometimes abandon a book in the middle when it's not working for us. And there are also times in our lives where we might not read that much.
Why is this choice so powerful when developing readers?
Well, we know that children read more when they self-select their own books. Choice is very empowering. And this isn't just with reading. When a learner loses their choices, they become disempowered. We know that when children self-select books, they will stick with a book longer. We know that they will persist, that they will pull out every reading strategy they're learning at school in order to navigate a book that they're engaged with reading and that they're motivated to read. So that choice is power. You know, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And if we really want children to benefit from the reading instruction at their schools, they need opportunities to practice what they're learning within the context of real reading events. So when a child is taking what they're learning at school and they can apply it to a book they've self-selected to read, and they can do that independently, they've learned it. That's deep learning, that's transfer, that's what we're hoping for.
Explain the importance of using books as mirrors and windows.
Well, that comes from Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who coined a metaphor that we still use pieces of today. Dr. Sims Bishop just won a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Library Association for her scholarship in this field. And she talks about how books should be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Books should be mirrors that reflect our own experiences. Books should be windows that give us a glimpse into the lives of people who have different circumstances than we do, different backgrounds than we do. And books should also be sliding glass doors, pathways that connect us as a global family and as a community. It's powerful for children to be able to see themselves and their families reflected in books. It's also powerful for children to learn about people who may have different experiences than they do through their books. That's why that mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors metaphor is so powerful.
Interesting. All right. Explain the importance of third grade reading proficiency.
We know that if children are not reading at grade level by the end of second grade, really, that it starts to become harder and harder for them to be successful at school. And children who are not reading well in those formative years, the gap between the children who can read and the children who can't just gets wider and wider. It becomes more difficult for children to be successful. We focus on third grade because that's kind of our last spot. You know, we're hoping they come out of second grade reading at grade level mastery. We're really focusing on third grade as this is the time to get everyone caught up if they're not reading at grade level. We just know that it becomes more complicated and more difficult for children as they get older when they can't read well. It starts to catch up with them in every class, not just in their language arts or English class. The inability to read well and to write well starts to affect you in history class, in science class, in math class. And so we're really wanting to catch kids before they get to that place.
Is all hope lost for a child who cannot read well at the end of third grade?
I don't think it's ever too late to become a reader. I talk to high schoolers who are discovering reading for the first time, or they really start to feel capable. We of course, the earlier we can intervene and help a child grow and be successful, the better. But I don't think we can ever just decide it's too late, especially when a third grader is 8 years old, 9 years old. We would never want to give up on a child as an 8-year-old and say, he's done. So I don't think we can have that mindset. We have to believe they can all get there.
Tell us about Kelsey, or maybe another child like her, who made remarkable strides in reading after the third grade.
Can I scratch my nose real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Kelsey's one of my success stories that I can share with you what's happened to her all the way through her adult life. I talked about Kelsey in my book, The Book Whisperer. Kelsey had supportive parents. She was not successful at passing the state assessment in third grade. She was not successful in passing it in fourth grade. She was not successful in passing it in fifth grade. As I said, her parents were very supportive. They would take her to the library. She was also in tutoring. She was working with the wonderful reading specialist at our school, but she just wasn't making the gains that she needed to make. And so Kelsey was in my class for sixth grade, language arts and social studies. And not only did she still have all that support that she had before she came to me, she also read a lot. A volume-based intervention, if you will. Not only do kids need the instruction, but they also need to read widely and in volume in order to be successful readers. So all of the other supports that she had in place, but also read a lot of books the year that she was with me in sixth grade. In sixth grade, Kelsey passed the state assessment, and she never failed it again. She's now an adult, and she's teaching first grade. And when I saw Kelsey not too long ago at a teacher conference, I ran into her. She said, Mrs. Miller, I bet in third grade, no one would have believed that I would have become a teacher. But there she is teaching, and she said her experience as a striving reader actually helped her be a better teacher because she could empathize with the children in her classroom who had those struggles too.
Interesting. Okay. Explain then the Matthew effect.
Our concern is that kids who read a lot grow their skill. The more they read, the more competent and confident as readers become, the more invested and interested in reading they become, while children who do not read very much do not aggregate that skill. And the gap between our kids who read the most and our kids who don't read that much just gets wider and wider as we go through the years. That's why we're so focused on elementary school and making sure that our kids are reading a lot, because the situation doesn't improve for them as they go up through secondary school if they're not reading. No matter what instruction kids are receiving, no matter what interventions and supports we provide, if kids are not also reading a lot, they are not going to grow their skill.
The Scripps Howard Foundation, Scripps employees, and family members donate money to purchase books for children in our communities whose parents cannot afford books. We then give away books on the same day in January. Many of our stations sponsor book fairs and invite employees to help children select books. What advice would you give to adults who have never helped a child select a book?
A child is driving the book selection process. We don't have to be the drivers of it for them. Starting with children's interests, what are their personal interests apart from reading? What are the things that make them happy? What are their individual passions? Is it sports? Is it art? Is it science? Do they want to read about dogs? I think we really try to build just a little bit of a relationship with that child around their interests, and we can always find a book that might match one of those interests. So getting to know the children, even for just a minute or two, what are their interests, what do they like to do outside of school, can be one of the fastest ways for us to help them find a book.
In the Book Whisperer, you include the quote, "To acquire the habit of reading is to construct for yourself a refuge from almost all of the miseries of life." Talk about how giving books to children in poverty can improve their lives beyond the classroom.
Reading is aspirational for us. When we read, we can write a different chapter in our own life stories. Reading gives us an opportunity to expand our understanding of the world, to see where we fit in a timeline of human existence that stretches into the past and goes into the future. When we give a child the gift of reading, we're giving them power. Literacy is power. We cannot fully participate in society without literacy. Now, of course, when we're talking to an 8-year-old, they don't care much about the fact that we know people who read as adults vote more in elections, or they volunteer more for charity, or they travel more, or they're more likely to have college degrees. We have to focus on that engagement piece. But as adults, we can't lose sight of the fact that children who do not have strong literacy skills are not able to fully participate in society, and that we are giving them power that will last them long after that interaction with a single book.
Okay. This is the last topic. It deals with raising readers. You write, readers are made, not born. How can parents raise readers?
It's interesting, the things that encourage kids to read at school and the things that encourage kids to read at home are sticky. There's a lot of overlap, so it's really 4 things: time, access, choice, and community. So time spent reading, daily reading. It starts when children are small, reading to them on your lap every single day. As kids get older, putting that reading time on the family calendar. You know, a lot of our families are overscheduled. They have a lot of things going on. Kids are in sports, they're in dance, they've got tutoring, parents are busy, they're working at night. Putting that family reading time on the calendar. And then adults sitting there and reading too. So it could be magazines that you're reading. It could be even things for work. Being transparent with children about how reading is something that you are doing every day for work and for enjoyment. So I say 20 minutes of family reading time every night is helpful. All the way up through the years. We often start to fade out on those things when kids go into middle school and high school, but they still need it. Access. Kids need library cards, books for birthdays, books for Christmas, those pockets in the back of the car, behind the front seats, throwing some magazines, some joke books, some trivia books about animals in the back as your boredom insurance. I don't know how many times my daughters have laughed at me and said, "Mom, you said we were going to be out running errands for an hour. We're on our 4th hour of errands now." It's nice to have those books in the back seat for those boredom moments. Choice. Empowering children to choose their own books. I do think parents are the last line on what their children read and what they don't read, but giving kids as much choice as possible from acceptable options. So encouraging their choices and celebrating their choices, even if we think the books are a little trivial. They're not trivial to the children. And then community. We know that children read more when they see other people reading. Talking to adult readers, we find that when we ask them, who are the influences who led you to reading at a pivotal time? Number 1 answer is family members, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, cousins. That is a powerful influence for kids. Of course, number 2 and number 3 on the list, teachers and librarians. Kids often have that adult mentor in their lives, or even a sibling who connects them with books at a pivotal time.
Tell us about dormant readers and what parents can do to foster a love of reading in children who are reticent to read outside of the classroom.
Some of that has to do with how we are, well, one of the reasons that we see, I'm going to start over because I didn't answer that in the way that the question made any sense. Okay. The term dormant readers is really a mindset term. I don't subscribe to the terms struggling reader or reluctant reader. I don't think there's a whole lot of hope in those terms. Striving reader, dormant reader. We have to believe that the kids can get there, because if we don't believe it, why would they believe it? A dormant reader is someone who doesn't have an academic reason why they're not reading. They don't have a cognitive learning difference or some sort of disability that might prevent them from learning how to read well. They just don't read very much outside of school. That has a lot to do with how we're over-managing reading at school where we're dictating every book that kids can read and everything they must do with the reading when they're done. If we had to write a book report or take a test after every book we read, a lot of adults wouldn't read anymore either. That means that the reading at home has to be as free and as open and as engaging and as low strings as possible, because we're trying to counteract that. That means, what are our child's interests? Is there a magazine we could subscribe them to, like Sports Illustrated for Kids or some other magazine they might be interested in? Comics, graphic novels, series fiction, whatever they're interested in reading. Still reading out loud with children, even as they go up through the years, is important, particularly if they're dormant readers, they're not motivated to read. And then just, we're relentless. We're talking about it every single day. I know that sometimes it becomes hard to nag your kid about reading at home, but they need to do it. Always asking them what book do they have going, taking them to the bookstore, letting them pick whatever they want. Taking them to the book fair, letting them pick whatever they want, and then celebrating when they pick anything, I think is the best path that we have.
I'm here for a reason. Right. Children often run from sports to music lessons to club activities. How can parents carve out time throughout the day to get their children reading?
I've often asked my students at the beginning of the year, raise your hand if you can read in the car, because many of us cannot read in the car. I can't read in the car. It makes me motion sick. It's an interesting way to get to know each other, who can read in the car and who can't. So I often tell parents, throw that magazine in the back of the car. Parents are overscheduled these days. Kids are overscheduled. We're racing from school to dance practice to church to wherever, personal errands, whatever else it is we need to do. So throw some books in the back of the car. I walk out of the house every day with something to read or something to read on as part of my daily luggage. Many kids are not in the habit of doing that, so putting magazines in the back of the car, audiobooks checked out from the public library, the whole family could enjoy them together. And it's something to capture that 10 minutes when we're all sitting in the car going from point A to point B.
And how much time each day or each week should children read outside of school?
What we know from research is that children who read 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day over the course of a year score at the 90th percentile on standardized tests of reading. Kids who only read about 10 minutes a day over the course of the year are at the 70th percentile. So that sweet spot is really 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. That's combined at school and at home. Of course, if kids are reading more at school or more at home, then they just benefit even more from that advanced reading time.
In the book Whisperer, you write a great deal about expectations and how you motivate your students with and without words. Translate that philosophy for how parents can set the stage of reading in their homes.
It starts with us. If we're asking our children to read at home, but we ourselves are not modeling any reading, then we are probably not going to get the gains from our kids that we would like to see. We can't just stand off to the side and tell kids they need to be reading, because that turns it into a school job then. Now, a lot of adults will say they're not readers or they don't have time to read. We're doing a lot of reading. We're just not very transparent about it with our kids and telling them, hey, I have to read this giant report for work, or I'm reading news on my phone. They don't know that we're reading sometimes in those moments. They just see us as working or see us on our phones. My mother has dyslexia, and she really struggled to read, but she took us to the library every week because she knew we needed to be reading. And she would check out a book, and sometimes she couldn't read those books, but she knew that we needed to see her with a book in her hands. So modeling for our kids our own reading lives, I think, is important. Explaining to them all the different types of reading that we're doing is probably the first start.
How can parents then encourage their children to see themselves as readers?
Engagement is the key in helping kids see themselves as readers. Again, choice is also a powerful component when children are able to self-select their own books, they can choose things that are personally meaningful to them. What are their personal reasons for reading, their hobbies, their interests, their pastimes, things that fascinate them, stories that they enjoy. One of the great benefits of reading that I see these days for us is that reading gives us a place to be quiet in a world that doesn't give us a place for it. And that's beneficial to the individual too. You know, the world is coming at us from 360 degrees, and the ability to be able to sit somewhere for even 10 or 15 minutes and read and be inside your own head, we know it reduces anxiety, it reduces stress, it lowers our blood pressure. Kids are stressed out too. So even encouraging them to read as a way to find some peace and some quiet in their own heads is an area that I think we could talk about, especially with older kids.
Lastly, with the holidays coming up, any tips for what types of books parents should purchase for their children?
Every 2 years, Scholastic conducts a nationwide survey called the Kids and Family Reading Report. It's one of the largest studies of its kind. They use an outside research firm, so the research is clean, and it's kind of the pulse of what reading is in America with American school children. They survey children ages 6 to 17 about their reading habits both at school and home. And year after year, kids tell us that their favorite books are books that make them laugh. Their favorite books are books that have pictures. Their favorite books are books that are about families and animals. These are topics that are eternally popular to children, books that are fun, books that have action in them. And a lot of kids like to read about families. They like to read about kids who are just like them, kids who have all different kinds of families, who go to school and live in neighborhoods very much like theirs. Any book with a dog on the cover is a home run. I could take a book with a dog on the cover and get 10 kids to read it in the bookstore. So asking kids what their interests are. But what we see persistently is that books that are funny, books that have a lot of action, books about families, books with animals, and then series. The great news about series for families is that many kids walk into a series non-readers. They walk out readers because they grow their reading skill and their confidence. You know, they don't start out at comprehension 0 when they walk into the next book. They take the background knowledge from book 1, they bring it into book 2. Their ability to predict what's happening in the book improves with each book in a series. And for parents, luckily, there are a lot of great series out there for kids to read. So connecting a series connecting your child with the series can be a powerful way to keep them reading, because there's not that lag time from one book to the next. You don't know what you're reading next, you're reading book 2. You're reading book 14 if I can find it for you. And it also gives parents a little bit of guidance on what they should buy them next or help them check out next. Because when a child loves a series, well, you know what you're getting them. You're getting them the next book in that hot series that they love.
Absolutely.
Well, sometimes when we talk about making sure that kids have the books, you know, people will be like, well, what about if you just gave them a Kindle and then they could just download books all the time? And does it make a difference having an actual book as opposed to electronic, or is it sort of like, no, any reading is good reading?
Sometimes we think if we can get children a device that they might read on a Kindle, we can certainly download a lot of books on something like a Kindle or on an iPad and increase students' book access. Anything a child will read on is what we want for them to have. And I've had students who have vision problems or dyslexia, or they need the vocabulary support, and being able to read on a device has been a powerful tool for them. But what's interesting is we have a few studies that have already come out about electronic reading, and what we found is that we don't remember as much of what we read on a device compared to what we read on a paper book. Some other studies that show that teenagers still prefer overwhelmingly to read paper books, which is not what most of us would predict. Elevators didn't put stairs out of business. There's still a lot of power in those paper books. It really matters, I think, to the individual reader and what their preferences might be.